In the last stretch of the season, Barcelona were only able to pick up 5 out of a possible 21 points. Barca dropped points against teams like Leganes, Las Palmas, Celta Vigo, Real Betis, Real Sociedad, and most recently, Atletico Madrid. The team that had once built a 10-point lead at the start of the 2024-2025 season now sits in third place after having failed to put up any kind of performance in recent season. And now, the first half of La Liga is over. So I decided to take some time to look back over Barcelona's last 7 games to see what were the clues and what could be done. But without further ado, hi guys, welcome back to my channel. And on today's video, we will be delving deep into Barcelona's recent slump in La Liga. And I'm doing so with one question on my mind. What is wrong with FC Barcelona? And I think to answer this question, we need to go back to the summer of 2024. When the season had ended and everybody had gone off to Europe to participate in the Euro competitions, Barcelona's stars were shining bright for Spain. Pedri was back fit, Lamine Yamal was the toast of the town, and there was another burgeoning name that no one saw coming, but with the ultimate injury to Pedri, will become one of the most talked about stars in Europe. Can you guess? I'm talking about Dani Olmo. But before then, it was Lamine Yamal's partnership with another Spanish superstar that had many of Barcelona fans dreaming. If, maybe, could it be Nico Williams becoming part of FC Barcelona? The only problem with that was FC Barcelona has been managing financial struggles for the better part of 3 years. Getting players in and out of the door has been a struggle. So, whenever Barcelona went to the market to talk to players about joining the club, it was always with the doubt of whether said player would be able to be registered. Ultimately, Nico Williams failed to join Barcelona. Dani Olmo, on the other hand, put faith in his childhood club and decided to return to the Catalan side. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Barcelona brings in Hansi Flick. The German manager had once overseen one of the club's most humiliating defeats in Europe. And if you remember correctly, I am talking about that 8-2 defeat to Bayern Munich in the Champions League quarterfinal stages. It was simply a demolition. And that team had the GOAT, Lionel Messi in it. But this puts fear in nobody because across town, or across the way, I should say, Real Madrid had signed Kylian Mbappe. Los Blancos were strengthening their squad, while Barcelona were only able to put on band-aids on what was a very fragile situation. Nobody in world football expected Barcelona to be as good as they were when the season started. Nobody, not even me, who was a super Barcelona fan. However, when the first whistle of the game was blown for Barcelona, Dani Olmo made an immediate impact when he subbed on for Barcelona and ensuring Barcelona had the win in that game. And from there, the team were flying. It was amazing. They were scoring goals for fun. 5-0, 5-1, 4-2, 7-0. Those were some of the scores that Barcelona were putting in at the start of the season. The team weren't particularly playing the tiki-taka style that the club has come to be known for. But when you're scoring this many goals, no one cares as long as you win. And that was what the teams were doing. One of the things that characterized the early part of Barcelona's season was the high-intensity football. It was quick and it was energetic. But at the back of your heart, you always wondered, could they maintain this intensity for the remainder of the season? As we will now come to know, that was too much of a demand for this club and this squad that is so shallow in depth. I'm breaking down my points as to what is wrong with Barcelona into one overall talking point, but with sub-points. And my first thing is fatigue. Because of Barcelona's finances, they were unable to reinforce their squad. Barcelona couldn't bring in a striker to sub in for the aging Lewandowski. Lewandowski is 36 years old, going on 37, while in normal everyday life, that is quite a young man. But for a footballer, sporting world, where you have to play week in and week out, he's quite old. And to make matters worse, Lewandowski does not have any relative backup in Barcelona's squad. But one thing that you would know about Lewandowski is he's very used to starting good. A recap as to the start of the 2023-2024 season will show that Lewandowski also started well in that season as well. He started lights out. This season he scored 17 goals in LaLiga, way before anybody else. And then, as the match continued to accumulate, it just became too much for his aging body. You have to remember that between August and October, we had multiple international breaks. So in adding to the fact that players were playing week in, week out for their regular clubs, there was also the added breaks for international games, meaning that the games were starting to compile. And at some point, I would say that almost every 3 days, there was a game on. Lewandowski is 36 years old with no clear replacement. He's tired. And fatigue is something that I would say has come to be characteristic of this Barcelona side within the last 7 games in the La Liga. For me, I would say what was clear when I went back to watch the games from the last 7 versus the top was how the intensity had dropped. Barcelona used to be the team that would press defenders up until the final whistle of the game. However, in their most recent games, they seem to be less of the aggressors and more of the prey, in that they weren't able to keep that high level of intensity that Flick ball demanded for 90 minutes. Hence, we know what we saw. The next thing I want to highlight is the overdependence on certain players. I've just mentioned that Robert Lewandowski does not have an out-and-out replacement. That is just one part of the problem. This season, we got introduced to Marc Casado. Nobody in the Barcelona fan base expected Barcelona to be as reliant on Marc Casado as we have come to be. This is a player who doesn't get enough credit for his work, but his absence clearly shows. What do I mean? Marc Casado is one of those players that is going to give you 110% of their effort. He's there winning every long ball. He's there winning every grand duel. He's there ensuring that he breaks up the opponent's attack. When Marc Casado is not in the squad, there is that level of grit that the Barcelona team loses. That overdependence on Marc Casado was clearly seen when Marc Casado was out after picking up a red card in the game versus Celta Vigo, and how Barcelona could not survive without him. Another player, and this is a statistics that pundits will like to tout, but I don't necessarily think it's a good thing, is the overdependence on Lamine Yamal. This season, Barcelona hasn't lost a game when Lamine Yamal played. But Barcelona are 0-4 for every time that Lamine Yamal is injured. And I think if we look back very carefully, that we would begin to see that Barcelona's collapse started around the time that Lamine Yamal was injured the first time. They just clearly aren't the same team without Lamine Yamal, because there isn't that level of attention to the right when he's not there. Lamine Yamal brings a threat that defenders cannot ignore. There has to be somebody or two on him, which means that when defenders are paying attention to Lamine Yamal, somebody is free. Somebody is open. And he's so intelligent in knowing when to pick those passes for his open man for Barcelona to score. That dependence on Lamine Yamal is something that Barcelona needs to break away from. There needs to be a new generation of stars with the same level of threat for Barcelona when Lamine Yamal is in there. And now, goal drought. At the start of the season, Barcelona were scoring goals for fun. In all those games that Barcelona has dropped points, Barcelona was still creating ample chances. The defense, the midfield were doing what needed to be done. But something up front was just not clicking in the way it was before. In that Barcelona were no longer scoring for fun. If you watch the game between Atletico Madrid, you will see on 3 occasions were particularly frustrating because there was a ball where Lewandowski hits it straight at the goalkeeper, and it was on the ball that you expect Lewandowski to be able to score at every given opportunity. However, in recent times, he has not. And that goes for everybody else. Now, in my opinion, forget about what everybody else is saying. This is my opinion. I don't think that Barcelona has ever been a particularly good defensive team. However, Barcelona have been a very good attacking teams. If you go back to the days of the MSN and co, it was not the defense that won Barcelona games. It was the attack. And so if you take the attack away from Barcelona in that you were able to score, you run into problems immediately. And that is the problem with Barcelona right now. In my last video for Barcelona, I referenced the fact that Barcelona seemed to be at the juncture that they were around this time in the 2023-2024 season, where they weren't able to score and they needed to bring in Vitor Roque, who wasn't even scheduled to be on the squad until the summer of 2024. However, they needed to bring him in January of 2024. A few months down the road, or should I say 12 months down the road, Barcelona are exactly where they were before, in that the team isn't scoring. The goals have dried out. You have an aging striker who is absolutely tired. And we need to find the goals from somewhere. My final point as to why Barcelona is struggling, and even though I just mentioned it in passing right now, is the defensive struggles. Barcelona's defense were amazing at the start of the season. Offside was Barcelona's 12th man this season, or at least in the earlier part of the season, because the team understood itself to a T. A partnership between Inigo Martinez and Pau Kubasi in center of defense, very unlikely, but very successful at the start of the season. But we knew that it was only a matter of time before teams were able to time those runs perfectly. There was going to be film, and studies will have to be done to see how teams can break down Barcelona. So, of course, it makes sense that of late, a defensive mistake here and a defensive mistake there have ensured that Barcelona have dropped points. Now, I still think that the offside trap is working well. The problem with it is when you switch out players. So let's take the Leganes game, for example. Pau Kubasi desperately needs rest. Hansi Flick recognizes the moment and decides to rest Pau Kubasi. In comes Eric Garcia. Eric Garcia hasn't played with Inigo Martinez in partnership all year long. And I made that mention when I saw the lineup. I was not very comfortable with this change. However, it was a rest that was needed at the time. A defensive mistake from Eric Garcia in this instance is what cost Barcelona, in that Eric Garcia did not know to pick up his man when an in-swinging cross came in and the player was left with a free header. Another similar incident I will mention will be how Barcelona have been able to concede goals at the end of the games recently. Like last season, it was to be said that Barcelona's defense was shipping in goals at the start of the games, like literally within the first 5 minutes. But this season, we're seeing that Barcelona are having issues closing out the games. We dropped points particularly against Celta Vigo in the dying hours of the game, and did so again against Atletico Madrid. And it can only be brought down to one reason. The team pushes high up. They understand that they want to get a goal. I'm talking about Atletico Madrid here. They want to get the goal, they want to get the win. But in a very naive way, they forget that their defense is so very high and that they cannot afford to make any mistakes. A misstep here, a misstep there, and Barcelona is carved naked by Atletico Madrid. This is something that we saw again in the Celta Vigo game, where Barcelona was able to concede very late in the game due to defensive mistakes. So to round up my video, I think that Barcelona is going through a season of fatigue amongst players because they were not able to reinforce their squad the way that they would like to, especially in attack. But fatigue is only one part of the problem because fatigue has now given rise to two problems or three problems, or I should say. One, in player dependency. Two, in a goal drought. And three, in defensive mishaps. All of which has culminated in Barcelona now being third place in La Liga as opposed to where they started in first place earlier on the season. Let me know in the comment section what you think Barcelona's problems have been and if you think that I've hit the nail on the head in this video. But until next time, bye guys.